Hello mind mappers and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be going over Why We Do What We Do by L Deci, Understanding Self-Motivation. And Edward is one of the foremost researchers on self-motivation, and inside this book he's going to give us a lot of really great tips, some things that you might not have thought of before, and ways that we actually are motivated versus what kind of conventional wisdom might tell us. I'll give you a quick hint before we get into the book. It's not by watching motivational videos on YouTube, that's absolutely for sure. But there is some really deep insight here, I think, into the ways that you can motivate yourself, the ways that you can use kind of your mind to get you to perform to your highest level. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. The first quote that I pulled out of the book that gives us an overview of what we can expect to learn is that when it comes to motivation, people always seem to want techniques for motivating or for managing themselves. Screaming from the front cover of the most self-help books are statements about the newest techniques for motivating yourself, or techniques that have proven effective. The truth is that there are no techniques that will motivate people or make them more autonomous. Motivation must come from within, not from techniques. It comes from their deciding they are ready to take responsibility for managing themselves. When people are really ready to change for their own personal reasons, and when they are willing to face and cope with the myriad of feelings, anxieties, inadequacies, rage, terror, or loneliness that underlie the motivation for change. So this is really interesting, right? We got the very first kind of quote that I pulled out here is going to tell us that, hey, these aren't techniques. These are really a lifestyle, and it has to all start from within you. Once that has happened, various techniques may be useful for them. But without a true resolve, without reasons for change that are personally important, techniques will not help. When people put stock in techniques as something that will change them, they are expressing an external locus of causality rather than an internal one. They are holding the misguided belief that being controlled rather than autonomous is the means for bringing about meaningful personal change. A deep personal desire to change must come first, and then perhaps a technique can give people a little bit of help. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on here today, helping that come from within, and then here are some techniques that might help you along your path. You have to have a deep, real want to make the change. And of course, we want to begin with the end in mind. This quote is actually coming from closer to the end of the book, but I wanted to start here to give you an idea of what we're talking about today. This book is not just tips and tricks, and we're not going to be looking super deeply into techniques, especially not in the way that, as he said up here, other self-help books might be. Instead, we'll be looking at the research behind motivation. They're all hard-won scientific observations made by one of the foremost researchers in the world. We're going to look into things like why the way that you're setting goals might be making you unhappy and unmotivated, the difference between learning and integrating information, how true self-esteem is built from within and not from external validation. And a quick check-in before we get started, before we get into some of the big ideas, I want to ask, are you ready for change? Is that the reason that you're watching this video today, or are you looking for another tip, trick, and technique to get you out of the rut that you're feeling like you're currently in? A lot of this work is really difficult and counterintuitive to what society might tell us. Edward tells us that we need to have a deep and powerful want to change before we even try to get started. So if you're not in the place where you already have that deep, ingrained reason for changing, I recommend spending some time exploring that rather than going through this video. But if you are ready for change and you're willing to look into some different techniques that might help, that are scientifically backed, here we go. Let's talk first about mind mapping though. You can get the most out of these mind maps by following along. I've put the process of how I mind map in all 100 plus mind map templates, including this one, at the link down below. You can also go to the mindmapguy.com and get fully extended versions of these mind maps as well, including text. Following along is going to help you learn more, remember better, and apply these books to your life. Let's talk about intrinsic, right? This intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. The researchers found that if any of the three extrinsic aspirations for money, fame, or beauty was very high in an individual relative to the three intrinsic aspirations, The individual was also more likely to display poorer mental health. For example, having an unusually strong aspiration for material success was associated with narcissism, anxiety, depression, and poorer social functioning, as rated by a trained clinical psychologist. So that's very interesting, right? We're getting started with not necessarily what is motivating us or how to get ourselves motivated, but thinking about what really is motivation. And are we coming from the inside or are we coming from the outside? Are we thinking about things like money, fame, and beauty? Or are we thinking about some things that are like more community, personal growth, and contributions? Because he says, in contrast, strong aspirations for any of the intrinsic goals, meaningful relationships, for example, personal growth, and community contribution, were positively associated with well being. People who strongly desired to contribute to their community, for example, had more validity and higher self esteem. When people organize their behavior in terms of intrinsic strivings relative to extrinsic strivings, they seem more content. They feel better about who they are and display more evidence of psychological health. So, really, what I thought about here is how are we organizing our behavior? That's something that most of us haven't even thought about or we don't understand what it means. But essentially, we've got ideals, virtues, or aspirations that we want to uphold and manifest and make real in our lives. All of our behaviors, right, our habits, our actions, they're all pushing us towards those ideals or virtues. And if you want to change your habits, maybe you should start by looking at your values. Or if you're feeling yourself kind of living up to your habits potentially, like you're going to the gym quite often, you're making a lot of money in your career, whatever that is, right? If you're seeing kind of that material success and you're just not feeling fulfilled, that might be something to look at as well. Is how are you organizing that behavior? Are you doing kind of the hard exercise routines because you're kind of doing it from a vanity point of view? Are you working super hard at your job and getting promotions because you're really kind of coveting money, right? You want to be thinking about those things. And if you're just not feeling fulfilled, even though by all measures you're being successful, perhaps that's something to look at is how you're organizing the behaviors. So, what types of values should we be aiming for? Edward points out here, as does Sonia Lyubomirsky in her great books. I really recommend you check those out on the channel, all about happiness and what makes us happy. One of them is called The Myths of Happiness, which I really recommend. That we should be organizing around intrinsic ideals or intrinsic virtues, whatever you might want to call them. Meaningful relationships, personal growth, contribution, or service are all really good intrinsic motivations. And when we organize around these things, good things happen, right? When we actually feel accomplished something in any of these domains, we tend to feel more accomplished for longer. The daily habits that we have when reaching for those ideals are actually fulfilling in and of themselves, right? So, back in the day when I was going to the gym quite often, I was in probably the best shape of my entire life, even better shape than I am in right now. But what ended up happening is I realized that I was going there for vanity reasons, right? Every time I would go to the gym, I'd be flexing in the mirror. I'd be that guy, right? And what ends up happening there is I'm going to the gym. I'm going to the gym not for the joys of exercise and feeling my body and kind of getting rooted in my body, but instead I was going so that I would be in better shape and kind of for those vanity reasons. So each time I went to the gym, it wasn't actually fulfilling. But now I've really worked on my mindset around, how I'm organizing my behavior. And, going to the gym now is helping me kind of get in touch with my body and helping me feel that energy and kind of all the good things that happen, right? That self kind of um, personal growth and really kind of pushing yourself. Those are the reasons that I go to the gym. So each time I go to the gym now, I actually get kind of that little bit of essentially just feeling like I'm making progress, feeling like I'm fulfilled just for going to the gym and not because of the, way I look in the mirror or, the different size of clothes that I can wear or that type of a thing. So that's kind of an example from my own life. I really recommend that you look into some of the things that you're aiming towards, some of the goals that you're really striving to proceed to kind of manifest in your own life and say, am I trying to get to these things not necessarily because I'm really interested in that activity, right? For reading, for example, I find that a lot of people are reading because they want to get to some mythical, piece of information that's going to make their life a ton better, rather than just the joy of reading and the joy of kind of better understanding the human experience, which is fun in the moment. But if you're reading a book to get to the end so that you can find kind of the point or tell your friends that you read a book, is it really worth it? Is it really worth it? Okay, let's get to the next point, which is integrate. Authenticity necessitates behaving autonomously, for it means being the author of one's actions, acting in accord with one's true inner self. The key to understanding autonomy, authenticity, and self is the psychological process called integration. Various aspects of a person's psyche differ in the degree to which they have been integrated or brought into harmony with the person's innate core self. Only when the process that innate and regulate an action are integrated aspects of oneself would the behavior be autonomous and the person authentic. It is in the sense that to be authentic is to be true to one's self. So the whole question here of integrate and authenticity is how well integrated are you? So we organize our behaviors, and that's one piece of integrity, right? We want to live kind of in congruence with essentially what we say our stated ideals or our stated virtues are. We want our habits and our behaviors to match up to those as much as possible. But there are many other levels that we could be looking into. Jonathan Haidt talks about this inside his book, The Happiness Hypothesis. Again, I really recommend that. But people who are mentally healthy and happy have a higher degree of vertical coherence among their goals. That is, higher level long-term goals and lower level intermediate goals, and I would also say behaviors and habits and etc. They all fit together well so that pursuing one short-term goal advances the pursuit of the long-term goals. And a quick visualization of what this looks like, I really like the DILT's logical levels of change, where you've got your environment, behaviors, capabilities, values, identity, and purpose. Your purpose would be kind of your ideals that you're trying to live up to, your virtues, as the Stoics might call it. Your identity is who you see yourself as. Your values and beliefs is what you truly believe in. Your capabilities are like skills, right? If your purpose is to help people out or that community contribution, how are your capabilities? How are your skills of community kind of contribution? Or maybe you have certain skills that will help contribute to your community more than others. Your behaviors, your habits, are those all aiming towards that one defined purpose that you have? And the same with your environment, right? Each level kind of builds upon the other one. If your environment isn't set up correctly, then your behaviors are going to kind of feel like a challenge at all times. And the same with your capabilities, values, and beliefs, identity, and purpose. We're running at our highest level here as pertains to this pyramid, for example, when we're most aligned in each of these areas. Our environment creates the base for us to have good behaviors. Our behaviors continue to cultivate our capabilities. Our capabilities are kind of aligned with our values and beliefs, what we believe is going to be valuable. And then our identity and purpose are as closely aligned as we possibly can get them. The more aligned we are in each one of these pyramids, each one of these kind of sections of the pyramid, the more we're going to feel happy about what we're actually pursuing in our lives, the more grounded we're going to feel, the more we're going to feel in line with our purpose. So what does this look like in real life? Of course, we're all human beings. We're not simple pyramids. What does this look like for really, really for us, right? One area that I've been trying to get better aligned in is my day-to-day task management. So this would be inside of your behaviors, but really what's going on for me is, okay, the behaviors are one thing that I can control, right? A little bit more willpower, a little bit more discipline, all that sort of thing. And you see that there's a lot of books and stuff like that that are going to help you kind of focus in on that one part of the pyramid. But really what I found much more effective is setting up my environment in a way that's going to allow me to more easily kind of do the behaviors that are aligned with my purpose. And the same with my capabilities, right? If one of my behaviors that I want to do is to eat healthy food, maybe my capability to cook more healthy food, maybe my capability to plan further ahead. I need to be thinking about these things so that I can grow my skills to make the behaviors a little bit easier. So you can see that instead of just focusing on one particular aspect of the pyramid, it's a very good idea to focus on the levels above and below the pyramid to work your way into making it easier for you to stay aligned with that certain level. Often, I've got a long list of things to do, and each one feels like a to do item on my list. Each time I check one off, I don't feel aligned and I don't see myself moving forward. So this is another piece of the behaviors that I've often found is I don't actually feel like I'm moving forward. Remember what Jonathan Haidt said earlier is that people who are mentally healthy have that vertical coherence between what their long-term goals are and what their short-term goals are, or their behaviors, or as we would say inside this pyramid. So what I've done is I built a little piece of software for myself. And essentially what it does is it allows me to connect each to-do item that I have on my list, this video would be one of them, with my true higher level purpose, which is that community contribution with this YouTube channel to try and help bring awareness and try and help bring knowledge to other people about topics that I find fascinating and very helpful. So each time I have a different task, I try and align it with that higher level purpose, that goal that I've stated and written out. And that for me has really been game changing. It's been completely game changing in the fact that each day I might get 5, I might get 10 different things checked off on my list, but I know which part of my life, which part of my purpose, which part of my identity, which part of my values and beliefs, that piece that I got done, that 30 minutes, that hour was spent doing something, but it was actually aligned with my purpose or with my identity. So I really recommend if you can find something like that for yourself to do that as well. Speaking of that, our next point here that I have is the self. Ryan and I, which is the co-author of the book here, we've got Edward and we've also got Richard, sorry. And I put stock in the humanistic belief that it's important to be authentic, to be oneself, to march to one's own drummer. But just as obviously, we put stock in the importance of being responsible. To advocate autonomy does not mean to call for self-indulgence, because being truly oneself involves accepting responsibility for the well-being of others. Because being true to oneself has often been equated with an egoistic doing of one's own thing. Authenticity has often been perversely interpreted as justification for irresponsibility and then attacked by the critics who interpret it that way. The selfish, egoistic doing of one's own thing is in fact irresponsible and may have demonstrably negative consequences, but those behaviors are not authentic. They do not express one's of human autonomy. They are not instances of being one's true self. So the idea here is, who are you really? And of course we can get into kind of the difference between the ego and the self and all of those sorts of things, but what we're thinking about really here is, who are we really? Getting in touch with your authentic self, as we've already seen, is very important. We talked about it inside of Integrate and Intrinsic. Really what we're all talking about here with motivation is getting in touch with who we truly are. Getting to know yourself helps you better understand those things like your vision, your ideals, your capabilities, and that can take a lot of reflection and focusing on yourself. But as Edward points out here, we don't want to make this a selfish pursuit. For example, true alignment is a balance, autonomy and following your heart, and responsibility to others. So what does this mean in our own lives? It means that we should push to be our truest and most authentic selves, living up to our virtues and ideals as much as we possibly can, which is hard. And then bring that knowledge and wisdom back to the tribe and share our journey, while of course not stepping on anyone for our own development. So what I'm thinking about here is, remember when we talked about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic goals? Well, intrinsic goals, they definitely involve things like personal development. They involve things that are focused on the self. But what we're really trying to do is take that kind of intrinsic goal of being the best that we possibly can and use that kind of motivation to really bring that to our community, to the people that we touch, to make other people's lives better. And I'm really kind of the mind that if we weren't sent here to make other people's lives better, what really is the point? So that's kind of, I think, what we're getting at here is that there's a balance between focusing on yourself so that you come first and you're focusing on your own behaviors and on your own kind of goals in life, but not so much that all you care about is yourself, right? It's kind of like the extrinsic goals of money and fame and power and those types of things, how those aren't actually fulfilling. And the same thing would be true if you just focused on, how easy can I make my life, or how can I possibly make the most money, or how can I, retire on a beach. You hear all sorts of tales of people who have done those sorts of things, and they end up not being very happy. And I believe it's because they're not kind of aiming their life for contribution, which is something that human beings are really meant to do, and I believe at least built for. That's kind of, we grew up in tribes, and we were in tribes for a very long time. And I think that still is some of the most fulfilling piece, is when you can be part of a team, and you can be even potentially the leader of a team. Some of the most fulfilling times in my entire life were when I was running my gym, and I kind of felt like I was a leader of a team. And even in my own businesses now, and with this YouTube channel, I feel the same exact way. And I really kind of continue to double down on being part of a team, and sharing with others, because it's so, so fulfilling. Our next piece here is about esteem. We refer to them as true self-esteem and contingent self-esteem. True self-esteem represents a sound, stable sense of oneself, built on a solid foundation of believing in one's worth as a human being. It accompanies a well-developed true self in which intrinsic motivation has been maintained, extrinsic limits and regulations have been well integrated, and processes necessary for regulating one's emotions have been developed. True self-esteem thus accompanies freedom and responsibility. True self-esteem is not, however, the same thing as thinking that you can do no wrong. People with true self-esteem have a sense of whether behaviors are right or wrong, because true self-esteem is accompanied by integrated values and regulations. Such individuals evaluate their behaviors, but their feelings of worth are not riding on those behaviors. So this is a huge change for me as of recently, and we'll get into this piece a little bit, and I'll share a little bit of my own story as well. But who's in control of your self-esteem? This is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. We've got true self-esteem and contingent self-esteem. True self-esteem represents a sound, stable sense of oneself, built on a solid foundation of believing in one's worth as a human being. Contingent self-esteem represents the sense of oneself being rooted in the opinions of others. So contingent self-esteem is fragile. And actually, I've experienced this quite a lot myself. When I was much younger, I was incredibly socially anxious. Like, I couldn't even talk to a bank teller. I can't tell you, I couldn't order a pizza over the phone. My late teens, I started working out very vigorously, and I got into really great shape. That social anxiety literally went away. I was able to present in front of large crowds. I was able to talk to people one-on-one, all things that I could never have done before. The issue was that my newfound self-esteem was very contingent on my physical fitness. If I had eaten poorly for a few days in a row, I was even more socially anxious than ever. It wasn't until I understood this concept and worked on my own self-image that I truly felt confident in my own skin. And actually, something very interesting here that I thought about is, you can, when your kind of self-esteem is very much tied up in a particular metric of, like I said before, how I looked. That's like a metric that is really tied to. Now, what ends up happening is you keep track of that metric almost obsessively, and you really kind of optimize your entire life around that one particular metric. And what happened to me is, after I realized that this metric was really controlling my life, and it was kind of the key to all of my, newfound social anxiety, I went the complete opposite way. I didn't pay attention to it at all. I actually got a little bit out of shape while I was, not paying attention to this. But just recently, and actually kind of this book really illuminated some things that I didn't actually know that I was doing. But what ended up happening is I stopped focusing so much on the outcomes, right? So the way I looked, the amount of money in the bank account, but I was still able to measure things that were going on because I wasn't attached. So I think measurement is so, so important, right? If you're going to be good at anything, you're going to need to measure, right? What get measured improves. But there's also kind of a sick aspect to measuring. If you focus only on the measurement, what ends up happening is your self-esteem, your success and failure is all tied to that one metric. But if you can detach and realize that you can have kind of true self-esteem, inert self-esteem, intrinsic self-esteem, then you can use those measurements as a way to actually guide you, and a way to actually continue to get better, and as a way to continually improve. But I think just from talking to a lot of people on the channel, inside of coaching sessions and inside of just impromptu conversations that I've had, a lot of us are really focusing on this contingent self-esteem. And you're on this channel, so you're probably very good at aiming towards that contingent self-esteem. In fact, you might be killing that contingent self-esteem like I was when I was in really great shape because of, my vanity and my own need for kind of this contingent self-esteem. But I think, if 2021 could be the year for anything, for any of us, it would be the time for us to really double down on true self-esteem. Self-esteem that comes from a stable sense of oneself, built on a solid foundation. Because really that is where actually measuring makes a big difference, right? It actually can be very, very helpful, but not if it's kind of mentally destructive every time you do it. Okay, our final point here is introjection. The two forms of internalization are introjection, which Fritz Perls likens to swallowing a rule whole rather than digesting it, and integration, which involves digestion and is the optimal form of internalization. Autonomous functioning requires that an internalized regulation be accepted as your own. The regulation must become part of who you are, and it must be integrated with yourself. People often take in the values and rules of groups to which they belong, and they subsequently act accordingly. When this process occurs only incompletely, it results in introjects, that is, internalizations that take the form of shoulds and oughts. We've talked about this quite a lot on the channel before. You shouldn't be shoulding all over yourself. We talked about that before with some of Tony Robbins' books. But introjects are voices in one's head, so to speak, that come from the outside and issue orders. Sometimes like mean-spirited drill sergeants, and sometimes like loving and well-meaning, but nonetheless intrusive ants. When internalization becomes integrated, when they become true aspects of who one is, they allow more authentic actions and interactions. So this is certainly one of the number one takeaways from all of us on this channel. I've had the great pleasure of speaking with many of you, like I talked about in the last point, but almost everyone struggles with this. It's almost like this first stage of self-development is picking up introjections from books and courses. Being human beings, we want to follow a leader. And as I said before, we're kind of built into tribes. Often we allow authors and gurus, they'll allow themselves to be that for us. And they give us a set of rules, and you end up shooting your way through their version of reality. You might be listening to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You might be thinking the alter ego effect. You might be thinking about Joe Dispenza's work. And you might be super focused on that particular piece of kind of the giant puzzle that is life, rather than allowing that information to come in, allowing yourself to digest it and say, how does this fit into my own view of the world? How does this fit into my own life? Instead, you follow kind of what this guru has laid out for you. And what ends up happening there, of course, is that you're living someone else's life. So you never truly feel like you're able to get in alignment with that built logical levels, like I said, because your vision isn't actually in alignment, right? If you want to be in alignment at all, you have to really make sure that your vision is in alignment. That's the first piece. Introjection isn't what we're aiming for here. I want to kind of make a stand and say what we truly want to learn is from their research and teachings, a lot of really great points in this book, for example, and a lot of other great books that we read on the channel. But we also want to be sure that we're spending time thoughtfully integrating, keeping what works and ditching what doesn't. No author is exactly right. And I think they would totally agree with that as well. They might have certain aspects that work for them, and that's might be what they're sharing, kind of like what I do on this channel. But by no means am I right all the time, and by no means are any authors right all the time. The only thing we can do is take in their information, allow ourselves to digest it, and don't become introjects. Don't be kind of following their rules and shoulding all over ourselves. I want to thank you for being with me here today. We talked about Why We Do What We Do by L Deci. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about books or learning more about certain topics like habits and goal setting and learning, I recommend that you go and check out the masterclasses that I have available on the mindmapguy.com. 2-hour long masterclasses that break down hundreds of hours worth of studying on particular topics and give you the best ideas that you can put into action in your own life. Thanks again for being with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.